news. It's now time to take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe. We begin with Vice President Kashim Shettima, who has revealed that he narrowly escaped being removed as a sitting governor of Borno State by former President Goodluck Jonathan during the Chibok schoolgirls crisis in 2014. Speaking at the launch of a memoir on the controversial OPL 245 scandal by a former Justice Minister Mohammed Adoke in Abuja, Shettima said only the intervention of Malam Adoke and former Speaker Aminu Tambuwal stopped the move. The vice president described himself as the most demonized public official at the time, following frequent clashes with the Jonathan administration over insecurity in Borno. He commended Malam Adoke's legal courage, saying he firmly told the president he lacked the power to remove an elected governor.
Former President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan GCFR, with whom we have shared the sword and have now recalibrated our relationship, was mooting the idea of removing this Borno governor, and Aminu Waziri Tambuwal, the then Speaker of the House of Representatives, had the courage to tell the President that, Your Excellency, you don't have the power to remove an elected councillor. The President was still not convinced. He mooted the idea at the Federal Executive Council. I admire Mr. Mohammed Bello Adoke fundamentally for his courage and for his convictions and for his capacity to stand for what he believes in. He told the then president that, Mr. President, you do not have the power to remove a sitting governor, not even a councillor. They sought for the opinion of another SAN in the cabinet, Kabiru Turaki, who said, I am concurring with the opinion of my senior colleague. That was how the matter was laid to rest, but that was how my relationship with Mr. Bello Adoke and Aminu Waziri Tambuwal became eternally sealed.
All right, now in other developments, the presidency on Thursday formally reacted to news making the rounds that President Bola Tinubu stopped the issuance of 5-year multiple entry visas to U.S. citizens, saying at no time did the president stop the issuance of the multiple entry visas to U.S. citizens. Presidential spokesperson Bayo Onanuga, in a statement, said upon assumption of office over 2 years ago, the Tinubu administration issued a service-wide directive that Nigeria implements all bilateral agreements with other nations and adheres to the principle of reciprocity in diplomatic relations. Relatedly, the British High Commission announced that from July 15, 2025, most individuals applying to enter the United Kingdom on study or work-related visas will no longer receive a physical visa sticker, also called a vignette, in their passport. Now, this comes on the heels of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Yusuf Tugar, saying that the United States is mounting pressure on African countries to accept Venezuelan deportees, stating that it would be difficult for Nigeria to do. The minister also clarified that the fresh 10% tariffs imposed on Nigeria by President Donald Trump's administration may not have anything to do with President Bola Tinubu's meeting with the BRICS nations. Well, this conversation continues to develop, Rufai, concerning visas, tariffs, basically U.S. relations with Nigeria and Africa as a whole.
I think we're the first to break that story here yesterday, and if you remember, because when I first talked about it, while we were on the show, I made verifications from one of the highest levels of government, and they said there was no reversal. And I remember, I think before sports show, I did repeat it, that Nigerian government did not reverse any 5-year visa arrangement was given American tourists. So it's not because of that. And I remember we had that contention with Rutus at first, and we broke that story. Pretty much, from what I can decipher, this is just part of America's grand game against West African nations. Anyway, they've put forth some points. They've talked about data and information sharing. They've talked about, many other factors, overstay of visa and the likes. But obviously, it's not for a duration reciprocity. So the idea of a reciprocity there wasn't duration. It wasn't because we yanked off their own 5-year duration thing that we had both agreed on and we had done reciprocity on. It's not because of that. Secondly, I think some, what's it called? Some school of thought has also been muted around the fact that it might not only be Nigeria that's been affected as a result of this. A couple of other African countries have been affected. But I don't know why people are surprised. What do you expect from President Trump that told our African president from an English-speaking country that he's surprised he can speak English properly? In a very condescending way. What do you expect from the same man that called Africa countries S-hole countries? I don't want to use the word. What do you expect from an American president that uses, swear words unabatedly on television, no decorum, especially towards Africa as a continent that he looks down on, albeit aided by some African leaders, some of the activities too. People like Ruto, telling the police to shoot his own citizens that he swore to defend by the Constitution on the leg because there's skirmish in the country. So that's why we just have to put our house in order. And I also would like to support this government today and Minister Tuga by saying we are a sovereign state. America does not have the right anywhere to come and impose Venezuelan nationals that they are deporting out of their country and they come and no. And I'm happy. And this is where we need to stand with the Nigerian government and stand with Minister Tuga and stand with the Interior Minister and all of that. This high-handedness by America and some other countries in the West to think they can demean Nigeria is a sad one. So today, I stand with this government. We must stamp our foot. And the tariff, I don't think it's because of it's the BRICS thing. I think it's just also part of how Trump just like to demean nations. He thinks he has monopoly of everything. Just like he started interfering in the affairs of a sovereign nation like Brazil, trying to tell them what to do with Jair Bolsonaro. That's who he is. So we should call him out. And on this, I stand with this government and I stand with the ministers involved, and we should stamp our foot on the ground. Secondly, Dr. Abati was there when Mr. Shettima, Vice President Kashim Shettima, made that very bold statement that President Goodluck Jonathan at some point muted the idea to remove or to suspend him as governor of Borno in the thick of all of this crisis. Anyway, I will condemn Goodluck Jonathan for even attempting that, because that was an overreach. You should never think of a president doing that. But I will also applaud Goodluck Jonathan that at least he surrounded himself with people that don't have Ahithophelic counsel. Not like some leaders that surround themselves with Ahithophelic counsel. And I want to pay tribute to Mr. Adoke. Stellar man. Congratulations on your book review. I'm sorry I couldn't be there because of, many endeavors. But for you to give President Jonathan that counsel and for him to listen, it shows leadership. Because the same Mr. Shettima that is speaking, in this same his government, an aberration was committed. There was nobody that could give President Tinubu the counsel that you do not go ahead and suspend an elected governor. Only to think that the frivolousness for suspending Governor Fubara was shocking. Now, we now use state of emergency to settle political scores in states. We now put the veneer of, the state was under security threats. So the question is, my Egbon, where were you to stand tall? And I'm talking about the Attorney General, which is my very dear Egbon. Where were you to stand tall to President Tinubu to tell him they don't do what he has done? Because from the Jamatis personnel, we've seen how all of them are falling out. We've even seen how some people bragged that we wanted to impeach him. It's the president that saved him. So by the inference of that statement, what it just means is that it was not because of any security concerns. Because Wike himself said it. I want to impeach him. President Tinubu saved him with state of emergency. So state of emergency is now what they use to settle political scores and save people from being impeached. What an aberration in our nation.
Okay, I was there in 2014, including all the meetings relating to the subject that was raised. I was also there yesterday. Let me put this in context by saying that, one, the circumstances are totally different. In 2014, what we were dealing with ahead of the 2015 general elections was insecurity, widespread insecurity in the Northeast. And Senator Kashim Shettima was governor of Borno State at that time. And then there was this incident of the 276 Chibok girls who were abducted. That became an international issue. And, people giving it all kinds of phraseology. Christian students have been abducted. Borno State was no longer safe for Christians. It was in that context that the government was trying to find solutions. President Jonathan did not, on his own, take a decision. President Jonathan has this habit of always consulting his legal advisor, the chief law officer of the Federation. At that time, it was Mohammed Bello Adoke. And in the book that Mohammed Bello Adoke SCN has just published, at page 69, he singled out for President Jonathan for praise as a super respecter of the law. And we used to joke in those days, every little thing, my Attorney General, what does the law say? And Adoke will say, well, I'm a constitutional purist. I will only tell you what the Constitution says. We also had in cabinet then Kabiru Turaki SAN that Vice President Shettima referred to, who, as he quoted, said, he supported his senior colleague and brother SAN. And then, of course, Honorable Aminu Tambuwa was Speaker of the House of Reps at the time. He was also a lawyer. So it was not as if any decision had been taken. At the end of the day, the emergency that was declared in Borno State was just in a number of local governments where, Boko Haram said they had hoisted their flag and they were going to run a government. But nobody removed the governor of Borno State at that time. You may say, well, President Jonathan, as Adoke has pointed out on page 69 of his book, is a super respecter of the law. Now, two, yesterday, Vice President Shettima did not use the word suspension. He used the word removal. There's a difference between suspension and removal. And truly, the advice that he was quoting, on the basis of which President Jonathan acted, there's nowhere in the Nigerian Constitution that the president of a country is given the powers to remove. The emphasis is remove. There's a difference between remove and suspend. And so that was the point, basically, that he was making, which was, I found it very mischievous and, unfortunate that some commentators on that statement by the vice president have been saying, this shows that he's criticizing his boss, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. No, he did not criticize President Tinubu. In fact, the environment was so jovial and friendly, and this was in the context of he saying, in this hall, we have PDP, we have new PDP, we have the coalition, we have, the leaders of the coalition, and all of that. And everybody burst out into laughter. And then he made this point, just to acknowledge the commitment of the Attorney General of the Federation at that time, Mohammed Bello Adoke, to a purist and correct interpretation of the Constitution. The third point will have to do with what the law says. Section 305 of the Constitution is what talks about declaration of a state of emergency. The declaration of a state of emergency can come from the state level. State level, the state say, we have a crisis in our state, and then we need a state of emergency. Section 305 sub 4. Now, the National Assembly also has a role to play. The president also has a role to play. He approaches the National Assembly for a gazetted proclamation, and all of that process is worked out. Why President Tinubu was criticized in the Rivers State case was because, the democratic structures were suspended, whereas there is no such thing under that Section 305, because the Section 305 talks about when there is war. What they have in Rivers State is a political crisis. So the circumstances are different. And that's why I always talk that, look, when you look at these subjects, just put them in context. People should not talk out of emotion. If you pay attention to the context, you may be able to look at the details much better. However, what President Tinubu has done is to suspend, and that's why he's under pressure to reinstate and end the state of emergency. The Section 305, stipulating in a part of it that the suspension can only be for 6 months in the first instance. So the VP was talking about removal. That was the word I used, except I didn't hear him very well yesterday. Now, to go quickly to the U.S., for lack of time. Now, the point about Venezuela, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs saying Nigeria, is a sovereign state, will not allow, Nigeria to be treated like Venezuela, where you come and dump, persons who have been driven out of the United States by the ICE. You recall that there was some news about third country deportations, and the U.S. had already used certain countries, including South Sudan, which is at war, to which, some, illegal migrants in the United States were deported to. And so I think it's important that Mr. Yusuf Tuga has clarified that there is no such thing. And on the issue of visa restriction and all of that, I keep making the point that, look, every country has a right to define its own consular priorities. The only problem here is that you have an American president who is promoting insularity. And to the extent that that insularity could be unfair to persons, could raise questions of human rights, particularly in terms of how this is processed, then of course that's why people are concerned. But it's good that Mr. Bayo Ononuga has clarified, because there's a lot of story out there that it was a previous administration that introduced the policy and all of that. But he says, no, there's no such thing in place from the Nigerian end, and that they are not aware that the U.S. is singling out, the world is singling out, Nigerians for any form of restriction.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to clarify the fact that this is largely affecting the countries that Donald Trump had, or the Donald Trump administration had listed as the 36 countries that they would look into implementing some form of travel restrictions for, when they cited some points around visa overstaying, security of documentation, sharing of information as well. And you'll find that this was implemented for Nigeria on the 8th of July, and something similar was also implemented for Ghana on the 10th of July. However, in the instance of Nigeria, I took some time out to do some investigation with the State Department. And on their side, my source was telling me that the conversations around reciprocity between the two countries have been going on almost in an unfruitful way for a long period of time. If you remember, yesterday I'd highlighted the point, the time when there was the dispute around the visa fees. And the point from the State Department was that, well, the visa fees from Nigeria are not stable. They tend to increase, they tend to vary in their cost, and there's no reciprocity. And at that time, the US wanted to increase their visa fees. This was around 2019. And finally, they agreed. The Nigerian government then was able to commit to a visa fee. But this was part of a frustration almost that was expressed by my contact in the State Department, that they feel that the reciprocity between the two countries has never been consistent and that it has not necessarily always been in good faith. She says that from the American side, the reason why it's easier to issue the long-term visas is because purely of the workload. So the fear right now with this new policy that has been implemented is that you might find that the visa waiting period, especially for those awaiting interviews, could go as high as 5 years if you only have 3-month visas and people are constantly having to come into the embassy, and already the embassy is overwhelmed. So she had said that from an administrative perspective, the long-term visas from the American embassy worked for them because it helped them manage their workload. Well, let's see what will happen now, because you will find that the embassy will become overwhelmed, and we wonder whether that will cause them to reverse their position. However, I think it's important to note that this is a broader conversation that's happening with other African countries, and this is what they're calling an immigration policy and not necessarily a policy that is targeting any one country. Now to the issues surrounding Vice President Kashim Shettima, referring to his time as a governor of Borno State and all the issues pertaining to insecurity and the tension that arose during that period, especially because he was extremely vocal in his criticism of how he felt the military was failing to handle and failing to squash insecurity in his state during that time. And of course, it created tension as he was also a member of the opposition. However, for me, one of the issues that came to mind was this conflict between presidency and governors pertaining to security continues to be a consistent issue that we see and that we're still failing to address. And yes, as we continue to hear all the different sides of the argument around state policing, it almost looks like history continues to repeat itself with regards to issues pertaining to security and how the presidency is tempted to always get involved when issues pertaining to security are involved. So there needs to be some sort of reform with our security infrastructure. As much as there's fear that state police might be weaponized, there's also the concern that we're not allowing the governors to be as accountable as they need to be for the security of their states. Then, final point before we go is the issue of weaponizing the anti-graft war. I think was a big theme, especially with regards to the takeaway from the book itself, is that yes, as we want to fight corruption, I think it's important for us to prosecute people and not persecute people. I think that was a major takeaway from some of the comments that I read that were taken yesterday.